Welcoming you into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad doing once again as we've got an awesome show planned for you guys over the next 3 hours. Had to go ahead and start it off with a little Ozzy Osbourne, one of my most recent songs that I really enjoyed from Ozzy when he collaborated with Post Malone. It's back in 2019, roughly, give or take. And yeah, the got the news this morning. In case any of you have not heard, we lost Ozzy Osbourne this morning. Obviously, rock legend, and immediately I looked over to my younger brother and I was like, oh, I just thought of this song right away. So, nevertheless, pleased to bring you guys into the Rip City Drive. We've got an awesome show coming up today, and pleased to tell you guys about the guests we have coming up today. We got the voice of the Portland Trailblazers, Travis Demurs, coming up in about 20 minutes live from the Big Apple. Travis is on vacation in New York right now, nice enough to join in and get his thoughts on Dame, Jrue Holiday, Young Hansen, some TV shows too, because Travis and I have a nice little crossover with what TV we like. So very excited to catch up with the voice of the Blazers, Travis Demurs, at 3:20. At 4:20, we'll be taking a deep dive into Oregon State's football schedule. The Beavers will be kicking off fall camp just a week from tomorrow as they get ready for the 2025 campaign. A couple weeks ago when I was hosting, we kind of ran through the Beavers position group by position group, and I looked at some of their strengths and weaknesses. And now we're going to run through the schedule and kind of take a look at how the matchups shake out, and ultimately how we think the Beavers' record is going to break out this year. So very much excited for that conversation at 4:20. Oregon State has a more challenging schedule this season than last, but figure to have a stronger top-to-bottom team that could be in that 8-9 win range. So definitely curious and excited to talk about that. Then to round out the show in the final hour, a treat for all of you, Rip City Radio Rose Garden correspondent Sean Hiken will be live in studio. He's been on a whirlwind of a tour recently, almost like a concert tour, I swear. I'm going to have to ask Sean how many frequent flyer miles he has racked up in recent days as he's been in Summer League, to the WNBA in Indianapolis, then back to Dame's press conference. So a lot to catch up with Sean Hiken. Want to get his thoughts on Summer League. Obviously, he was there for Young Hansen's big, strong few days in Las Vegas, in addition to some of the other players who popped as well. So I'm curious to get Sean's thoughts there. He was at the Dame press conference yesterday, and we'll be getting into that a little bit later here. This segment, actually, getting back into some of Dame's comments from yesterday. But, yeah, that's pretty much the plan today, folks. Again, Travis Demurs coming up in about 20 minutes, and Sean Hiken for hour number 3. As we mentioned, still breaking down the Damian Lillard news from yesterday is, it's been quite a whirlwind in terms of like a wave of Dame mania in the most positive way since he announced his return. And the press conference yesterday was well attended. It was quite long, and we carried it live here on Rip City Radio. And we'll be playing some clips here for you shortly. But once again, just got to double down. It's a good feeling to have Damian Lillard back in Portland. It's been palpable to see the excitement from the fan base, and it's been great. We had a couple callers call in last night to kind of mention how excited they are to have Dame back with the franchise. And it's definitely a very exciting, thing for the Trailblazers when there necessarily haven't been a ton of things to get real jazzed about recently. So it kind of gives you some much needed, momentum. Even though Dame's not going to play this year, it just kind of rising tide lifts all boats. And I think having someone like Dame back in the building is going to be just awesome. So that's pretty much it on Damian Lillard. And again, we're going to be playing some of those clips here shortly. A lot to get into from yesterday. Let's go ahead and hear. Let's start with Dame's intro yesterday when he met the media here in Portland.
Go ahead, Tyler. For me personally, well, first I want to thank Joe, and I want to thank Chauncey because obviously for this to even be possible, we all had to be on the same page about it. But like they both said, it never felt right not being home. And, through it all, I found my way back, and just fortunate to be back with the group that I was with prior to leaving, to be a part of a great situation at home. And I'm just excited, and really, really thankful and appreciative of the door being open for me to come back, even with me being hurt. And, it means a lot to me to not only play for this organization again, I never wanted to not be playing for this organization, but to be back in this community, that I'm most familiar with, the familiar faces, all of the things that I've been connected to, even during the time that I wasn't playing here the last 2 years. So it all just feels right. Usually when I have to make a decision, I put a lot of thought into it. I ask a lot of questions to the people around me, but this was a decision that wasn't hard at all for me to make. And, the people that I know love me and care about me, it was a easy piece of advice for them to give. It was easy for them to support. So, like I said, I'm just thankful to be back. And it just feels like the perfect situation at the perfect time. So I'm just happy to be back.
That's Portland Trailblazers guard Damian Lillard talking about how happy he is to be back and kind of his intro to his press conference yesterday. And, there's a lot to unpack there. And, I think the part to me that really stands out is when, Dame mentioned right off the bat, he's like, it didn't feel right not being here. And, it's one of those things where I'm not so sure Dame was like, thrilled to go to Milwaukee necessarily, but obviously went with it and then, ultimately realized with time that his family's here, his life is here, a lot of his friends and, relationships are here, businesses, dare I say, Damian Lillard auto dealerships. So, there's definitely a sense that like this was always home for him. And I think sometimes it's one of those situations where when a place is home for so long and then you want to maybe try something new, you even go into something new with purely, open mind, that you still can miss home and be homesick. And especially when you tie in the factor that, Dame's kids were here. And, I'm obviously not a father myself, but as, someone who can just understand that situation, it's got to be hard. And I'm sure that was a huge part of Dame's decision to want to come back. Kind of going along with that, Joe Cronin talked about the process of getting Dame signed, and you heard from Dame there that it was really smooth. Joe Cronin doubled down on that Portland Trailblazers GM and said the process was relatively smooth.
Once we learned Dame was leaving the Bucks, it all happened pretty smooth and organically. Chauncey and I sat down with him a few times and had some really good conversations. A lot of, talking about goals and, what the Trailblazers are trying to accomplish, what he's trying to accomplish, and seeing if those, goals aligned. And I think we knew very early on that those goals were very similar, and the key thing there was just work out a deal and let's get this done, and it was really that smooth.
So you'd love to hear that, just that there was no, again, I'm sure it's interesting. This is, relative to Dame, what we've seen the last couple of years, the mid-level exception is a lower price point. So clearly, you're never going to reveal those things. Maybe not a lot of, back and forth on price, maybe not even arguing about the no trade clause, which is pretty, rare in the NBA with only Dame and LeBron having that. So there is that aspect as well. And I think more than anything, it's just really good to have Dame back. But the reality of it is, and this was one of the big things that I noticed from the press conference, he still has a long injury road ahead of him, and he talked about that.
I literally, after I tore my Achilles and I felt it, and I was sitting on the floor, I grabbed it and I rolled over and I sat up. And the first thought that I had to myself was like, I'm about to come back from an Achilles. That was literally my first thought, like on my kids. That was the first thing I thought of. And we got to the back, and when the doctor said, you tore your Achilles, like I think everybody else had more pity for me than I did. Like I had the PTs, like, about to cry and all of that stuff. Like I didn't cry. Even when I got by myself, I didn't cry. And it wasn't like a prideful thing. My mind automatically went to like, I got to fight for something. I know it's going to be a long journey. I know it's a challenge mentally, and I kind of shifted right there to what I knew was coming. And then it was, just kind of learning more about it, talking to Aaron Rodgers and KD and Rudy Gay, all these guys that experienced it and handled it differently. But I never had that moment of like pity or any of those things with none of my injuries, honestly. But this one I know is like probably the biggest one of my career. And like you said, it's a mental battle, but if I don't lose those. If it's a mental battle, those battles that I don't lose. If it's physical, it's possible, but a mental battle, I'm just not gonna lose.
I love that last part from Dame there when he's like, if it's physical battle, okay, things can happen. But Dame literally doubling down and saying nobody is going to be as mentally tough as he is. And I mentioned this yesterday. One of the more impressive things to me about that particular quote right there is how he didn't allow himself to kind of have any self pity. And I think for many of us, if a big time injury happened, you would definitely have those moments of kind of like, woe is me, so to speak. And I think that's definitely just a human emotion and a natural response to something, like that it has such an impact, whether it's an injury or any other just hurdle in life, and a big hurdle. It's going to take up so much time. So, that was something that Dame really, really stood out to me about Dame's process. And, he obviously is asking all the right questions. You heard him name drop Aaron Rodgers and Kevin Durant and Rudy Gay. Some of the more notable players to have gone through an Achilles tear and still have a career on the other side. And there's always that possibility that the Achilles injury is one of the toughest in sports. It's hard to come back from. It's gotten better in recent years, and I think modern medicine is definitely helping that cause along. But still, it's a year. It's a long journey. It requires a ridiculous amount of physical therapy and rehab. And to Dame's point there, it requires a certain level of mental toughness. And I think there's that, and just the process that's ahead of you. I think it's kind of easy to look and see the players who maybe didn't want to go through all the steps they'd have to go through. And maybe that's why an Achilles is more of a career-ending injury. You hear from Dame's perspective there's not much of that going on whatsoever. He was like, he got hurt and he thought about it for a few moments, and that was pretty much it. So all considering, I think you heard all the right things you wanted to hear from Damian Lillard yesterday. And we've got tons more audio we're going to be getting into a little bit later in the show, and highly would encourage everyone to stay tuned for our conversation coming up next, as we're going to catch up with the voice of the Trailblazers, Travis Demurs, live from New York City here on the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter filling in for Chad Doing here on a Tuesday. We'll be back with the voice of the Blazers, Travis Demurs, on Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive. Brendan Slaughter here. Pleased to welcome back to the program the one, the only, your voice of the Portland Trailblazers, Travis Demurs. TD, how are things in New York, my friend? Appreciate you making some time.
Yeah, man, things are good. Good to talk to you. It's been a busy couple of weeks in Blazerland, busy summer really, but no, things are good.
Yeah, so I was just talking to Michael Shacker. So you're not on a vacation, or kind of are on a vacation? What's got Travis in New York?
Well, let me ask you this: if you moved away and then went back home to visit your family, your parents, would you consider that a vacation?
No, probably not. But
There you go.
it's one of those things where it's like I put in my head, Travis. It's like anytime I get on an airplane, it's like, okay, you're going somewhere different. It's kind of different, but I see your point and it's valid. But did you get a chance?
Exactly.
You get a chance to go to any Yankees games or kind of get any downtime?
Yeah, so they're on the road right now, but I'm going to go to the Yankee game on Friday night with my dad. But just hang out with some family, some friends, just real low key, just getting out of town for a little bit.
No, that's awesome, man. That's awesome, and I know you've got to be excited for the start of the Blazers season. A couple weeks ago, when I was here and you were on with Chad, you had just mentioned you're like, all right, I'm ready to call some games. Is that just kind of just itching at you until you get back in the back with the headset on?
Yeah, like for me personally, for so long, I didn't know what a day off was. I was working 2, 3, 4 jobs. In my first few years of, working for the Blazers, I was also still doing this show. So really, for the first time in my life, I am not really doing anything. So we haven't had a game in 3.5 months. I get to be dad, and that's great, and I'm keeping busy. But I miss working. I love my job, and I'm ready for it. So let's go.
Absolutely, and I'd be remiss if I didn't check in and ask, how are Lincoln and Lawson doing, man? How are they enjoying their summer?
Oh, they're awesome. They're having a great time. They both had birthdays this summer. They're with their mom camping this week. We just have a lot of fun, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. And that's the other thing, man. I think I told you last time, the more I see pictures of your kids growing up, it makes me feel old. So it's got to make you feel a little old too, right?
Yeah, it does. But also, like, I knew Chad's oldest. I knew Isaac when he was like 1.
Sure.
And now he's
College.
He's a grown man.
Yeah.
That makes me feel old.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, appreciate the time, TD. And, got some Blazer related things to get in with, but obviously just right off the bat, I mean, were you here when you heard about the Dame news? Were you in New York, and kind of what was your reaction when that hit? Like, obviously that Dame was coming back.
Yeah, I was, what day was that? Was that Friday?
It was,
I think.
Thursday or Friday, one of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, so I flew back here to the East Coast on Sunday. So I was out in Portland.
Gotcha.
And I had some, an inkling that this could happen. I think we all kind of hear some things, and nothing was certain, right? There was a possibility that it could happen. There was a possibility that, Dame might sign somewhere else, or that he might just take the year off completely. So I don't want to say I wasn't surprised, because that makes it sound like I was expecting it, but I wasn't. I wasn't, taken off guard. I wasn't shocked by it. But it was just to see him in a Blazers uniform again, to have him back as part of the organization again. I think it's important. He's obviously not going to play this year, but everybody was disappointed when he was gone. I think everything going on in his personal life and his business life made that whole summer a couple of years ago just a little strange and a little on edge. And then there were things that were reportedly being said by him that maybe weren't, and then by both sides. And it was starting to get really messy. And there was this idea of this, complete rebuild, which it wasn't really a complete rebuild. The record might tell you a little bit differently. But to be able to move Dame and get back all the pieces that they did, and then have him come back, and, next year, if he's 80% of what he was, I think that's a huge addition to this team, because they're not getting anybody better than him in free agency, and maybe not via trade. So I think just the fact that this team is where they are right now, the position that they're in, it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking about when you said that, Travis. It was Thursday, because unlike you, I was pretty shocked at it. I was out on the river, didn't have much service, was river floating on Thursday, and by the time I get home and kind of start going through my notifications, I'm like, wait, what? Really? Like Dame's back? And I mean, not necessarily shocked because, like you said, it had kind of been thrown out like, hey, Portland's a team to watch too. But, hearing it and actually seeing it are definitely two different things. And instantaneously, I just thought, what a positive thing for the franchise to have its biggest pillar in recent memory back in the fold.
Yeah, and some people will tell you they believe Dame is the greatest Blazer of all time. I think he's in that conversation as one of the 2 or 3 greatest Blazers of all time. It's hard to get much better than that. So just to have him, as part of the organization again, it's obviously great for PR, right? To have him be a focus again. He's not going to play this year. Anybody who actually knows Dame knows what his commitment level is like, and he is going to be around. He is going to help the young guys. He is going to be part of that, and then eventually he'll come back and play. But really, listening to his press conference last night, the thing that stood out to me more than anything, we hear and we watch documentaries, 20 years after the fact, and Kobe and Shaq as an example, or Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson, messy sports divorces. And somebody will say, 20 years later, I really wish I handled that differently because we had the chance to do something great and our egos got in the way, something along those lines. We've seen it time and time again in sports.
Sure.
So the fact that 2 years later, just 2 years later, after what went down, that Joe Cronin and Damian Lillard were able to reconcile. And I'm not saying there was this huge blowout, argument or anything like that. I wasn't behind the scenes. I don't know. But you heard what Dame said last night. He said, there was some miscommunication, misunderstandings, and we didn't talk about it. So the fact that they were both adults and grown-ups and showed a significant level of humility to repair that relationship in a time where it still could lead to something productive, to me, that's as impressive as anything throughout this whole process.
Oh, yeah. No, I was going to say that as well. I think that stood out. And, like you said, it was just the way Dame kind of characterized it, miscommunication and, this and that. And we all kind of remember how awkward it was at times during the or during the end of Dame's time. And I think that was awesome that he mentioned that he was, had a great relationship with Joe, Jody, and the whole brass. And I think that's something awesome to have back with Dame. And the other thing too, Travis, that I wanted to get your thoughts on is a lot of people I've seen are just kind of like, oh, this is a great story for Portland, and Dame wanted to come home because of his family. Dame also doubled down and said he's kind of been impressed with the basketball moves and the pieces the Blazers have acquired since he left.
Yeah, and look, if you want to talk about family first, Dame did not like being away from his kids. I've talked to him about that. And it is hard when you don't get to see your kids and be around your kids as much as you want. And last year when we were in Milwaukee, I had a conversation with him because, I got divorced about a year ago. And when you're on the road and you can't just call, hold on, I'm getting a call and I got to cancel it real quick. Sorry, I didn't want to beep it in. You can't just, it's not like I could call my wife and say, hey, put the kids on the phone. Because now that I was divorced, I couldn't, it wasn't that, we're amicable and all that, but it wasn't just I can call whenever I want. You know what I mean? So I was talking to him about that, and he didn't even live in the same city as his kids. Right. And that's hard. And, we kind of talked about that a little bit. And yes, it's a really important thing for him to be around his kids. But then you look at the basketball side of things, and you have potentially one of the top defenses in the league. And Scoot Henderson, who is now going into year 3 with a lot of mentorship around him with an opportunity to really grow. Shaedon Sharpe now going into year 4 with an opportunity to really explode. Denny Avdia had a terrific season. Toumani Camara, obviously Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and was the team's best three-point shooter last year. All of these things, the centers, there is really an opportunity for this team to have success on the basketball court. So for Dame, he has never had this type of defensive team around him. Right. He has never had a Toumani Camara, a Denny Avdia. He hasn't had these guys around him. So it's a great basketball opportunity for him. And you could say that, okay, going to the Eastern Conference with all of the injuries would make more sense if he wanted to compete. But he's not going to play this year. He's one of those injuries. A year from now, Jason Tatum will be coming back. Therese Halliburton will be coming back. Atlanta is putting something nice together. The Knicks have put something together. Cleveland has put something together. So while this year the East is going to be down, 2 years from now, you could have a situation where the East is looking pretty good. So for him to see a team that he still loves, in a community that he still loves, in a place that he wants to go, it's not like this is the Blazers of a year or two ago where the expectation was they were going to struggle, right?
Yes.
This is a team that can compete, and when he is back in a year from now and the growth continues, they can contend for a playoff spot. Might be a while before they can compete for a championship, but yeah, I think this is a good big picture, and for him, 3-4 year big picture basketball opportunity.
Absolutely. Catching up with Travis Demurs, voice of the Trailblazers, here on the Rip City Drive. Appreciate your time, Travis. And kind of going along, you led into the mentorship aspect of Dame, and I kind of want to loop in Jrue Holiday a little bit to the discussion too. And I mentioned this to the Godfather Dwight James yesterday, and he kind of thought the comparison was apt. And I asked him, like, in a best case scenario for like Jrue Holiday, maybe to an extent this year, Dame behind the scenes, could these kind of veteran moves be like what Chris Paul was able to do for the young Thunder a handful of years ago?
I'm glad you brought that up because Chris Paul is the exact example I used when the Blazers traded for Jrue, because it wasn't just Chris Paul with Oklahoma City. It was also Chris Paul with Phoenix and Chris Paul with San Antonio. A couple of years ago in the bubble, the Suns were 8-0 in the bubble, and they didn't have Chris Paul yet, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. They go and trade for Chris Paul, and what he was able to do to help bring all of that stuff together, they go to the NBA Finals. I'm not saying Jrue Holiday is going to come in and make this team an NBA Finals team right now, but there is something to be said about that. And this team has not had any veteran leadership in that regard. And I'm not saying that the veterans are not leaders. They're just not what Jrue Holiday is. Jrue Holiday, in terms of the type of guy he is as good as it gets. He is one of the best leaders in the NBA. He has won multiple championships, and he can still play at a very high level. So to have him there, and now to have Dame there, it's different when you're listening to a teammate as opposed to a coach. Chauncey's been there a few years. He's the only coach that Shaden has had, is the only coach that Scoot has had. To hear it from other players instead, it's just another layer. And I just don't get how people can't see that. It's critical, even if it's just for a year, to have that type of veteran leadership. It really does go a long way. And even Dame had talked about that in the past, that he wished LaMarcus Aldridge could have been more of that to him, but he wasn't. And now he wants to help be that for the young guys.
Yeah, and I think that's really coming full circle, because you remember, that's an apt comparison, Travis, because I remember back in the day, LaMarcus maybe wasn't quite the, arms wide open, hey, I'll embrace, the young star kind of a thing, and that's pretty well noted and all those things, and everybody's different and handles leadership in different ways and what have you, but you mentioned Scoot and Shaden and really just this young core. I agree. I mean, I think you can't really quantify what it can mean to add, and everything you said on Jrue Holiday, spot on, like that kind of leadership and Dame. It's like not just getting Jrue Holiday, it's also adding Dame, which is another level of like crazy good leadership.
Yeah, it really is, because from everything that I have seen, I have never seen a harder working athlete than Damian Lillard. I have never seen somebody that has all of the things that he has together with his humility. He's genuine. He's honest. He gives you well thought out answers. Jrue Holiday is very much the same in that regard. So, and they're different types of players. Look, Dame's not going to come in and help Scoot be a better defender, okay? But Jrue Holiday can. Dame is an elite three-point shooter. They have different skill sets and different approaches, but also have a lot of similarities in their character and things like that. And I know we keep talking about Scoot, right? And it's Scoot this, Scoot that, but it's not just him. It's everybody. And to have a veteran leader come in and help you through those situations that they didn't have, that's not Jeremy Grant, okay? Robert Williams III a little bit, but Malcolm Brogdon, a little bit, but they haven't had somebody who is the leader. Denny Avdia really was the leader last year, but he's still young, and it's not a knock on Denny to have somebody who has been there, done that, won a championship, has been around. You're right. You cannot quantify that.
Catching up with Travis Demurs here on the Rip City Drive. Travis, just a couple more sports questions, then I got to get your thoughts on some TV. But we've been talking so much about Dame as well as, I'm curious your thoughts on young Hansen and what he's been able to do and how excited you are to be able to call his Rip City debut.
Well, I'm really excited to watch him in person. I'm really excited to call some of his games. We have to pump the brakes on Summer League, right? It is Summer League.
For sure.
Summer League is not set up for bigs, right? Just like kind of like G League. It's set up for guards, athletes, playmakers, things like that. So with young Hansen, what stood out to me wasn't the numbers. I don't care about the numbers. What stood out to me is his vision, his passing, his footwork. He just turned 20 years old. There's a lot of room for growth. So to expect him to come in and be great right away, it's not going to happen. You look at some of the foreign-born players who have come in and had a high level of success in the NBA that are bigger players. It took Giannis a number of years before he was elite. It took Jokic a number of years before he was elite. So the comparisons, we can do that all we want. Everybody's on their own timeline. I'm really excited to see what his growth can be like, how long it takes. Because I think there is a very good chance that he becomes, I don't want to say all-star, but a very, very productive NBA player. Does it take him 2 years? Does it take him 5? Who knows? So to see what that progression is like, and now they add another coach who really is proven to be a very good big man assistant coach in Tiago Splitter. I really think everything is set up for this team in the long run to have success. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go out and win 50 games this year, but I think a year or 2 or 3 from right now, we could have some big-time hopes for this team.
Yeah, no, it's definitely exciting. And kind of just to follow along with that, Travis, in terms of just, eyeballs and positive kind of vibes, what is, when you combine, Dame's return with young Hansen and, potentially the fan base that he brings from a very, very populated country, seems like Blazers stock in terms of just eyeballs is going up right now.
Oh, there's no question. If you look at this time last year, they were coming off of a 21-win season. Scoot had been disappointing at times in his rookie year. Shaedon Sharpe was coming off of a season that he was mostly hurt. Okay, you had Donovan Clingan, who had just won a couple of national titles, but he's not exactly the kind of player that everybody tunes in to watch. And outside of Portland, and even in some places in Portland, nobody cared. There was a reason why there was one national TV game for the Blazers last year, and it was the game against the Milwaukee Bucks and Damian Lillard. I would imagine this year when the schedule comes out in a few weeks that we're going to see some more national TV games. Now that the Blazers are a little bit more on the radar with Dame, and to have, 5.2 million people in China watching a summer league game?
Right.
I mean, did 5.2 million people watch all of the rest of the summer league games combined? I don't know about that. So all of those things are awesome. And now you see a number of different national people, whether it be, podcasts or writers or whatever, they're saying that, hey, look out for the Blazers. They're a team that's on the rise. Without Dame, without young Hansen, they are still on the rise, but nobody's paying attention to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting, and I hearken back to something that Sean Hiken had mentioned to me a couple weeks ago, TD, which was, and, I obviously, but sometimes when you're, presented with information, it just kind of blows your mind, and when I had learned that there are more basketball watching fans in China than there are people in the United States, I just was like, whoa, okay, there's a lot of basketball fans in China.
Yeah, there is, and it's great. I mean, it'll help out the fan vote and all that thing. And I heard, so I don't know how to quantify it exactly, but I heard that there was a significant, number of Yang jerseys than that were sold than than Donovan Clingan last year.
Wow,
And
yeah.
just to have the eyeballs on it, it's great for a lot of things. It's great for revenue. It's great for the fan base. It's great for attention. And when there is more attention, nothing is a guarantee, but we've heard so much over the years about how the Blazers can't sign free agents, right? That, who's the greatest Blazers free agent ever to sign? And the list is not great.
Sure.
Well, in a place like Portland, you can sign free agents when you're close to winning. This team has not been in a situation where they're close to winning with salary cap space.
Right.
So when you are successful, the Warriors couldn't get free agents for 30 years, and then they get good, and guys are taking significantly less money to go there. Like if Minnesota Minnesota is pretty good, but Minnesota or Indiana or Oklahoma City, they're getting free agents when they're close to winning.
Sure.
They're not getting free agents when they're mediocre or a 37-win team. So I think all of this stuff, they have to, follow through and everything now. But all of this stuff leads to a significantly greater chance of good things to happen.
Absolutely. And again, Travis Demurs, our guest here on the Rip City Drive. Travis, just a couple more minutes with you. Appreciate your time. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk some TV. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a bit of Taylor Sheridan purgatory right now as they're kind of getting ready for filming and gearing up for the next rounds of seasons and shows. But from what I've heard, next up as in terms of like on the list is Landman Season 2. I forgot to ask, did you ever get into Landman, TD?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I watched the whole season. So, like, what I do is for TV shows in general, I don't watch, shows during the summer. Not that I don't watch TV,
Sure,
but I save that stuff for the plane.
Nice.
Right? So I save that stuff when I'm looking for stuff to watch during the season. So, when Landman Season 2 comes out, and hopefully it'll come out with the Tulsa King Season 3, I think there were a couple of other things. I'm going to wait for the season for those things to start. So I'm definitely excited about Landman Season 2 whenever it comes out.
Yeah, that was I really enjoyed Landman and Billy Bob. I thought that was a particularly fun show, and we've even seen it kind of get picked up by, just social media in a sense with certain scenes and whatnot that I thought was kind of cool. And to your point, I was going to mention next is Tulsa Kings followed that. I'm all about more Sylvester Stallone, but did you hear, Travis, that they're making a Tulsa King spinoff called No Law King set in New Orleans starring Samuel L. Jackson?
Oh, my gosh.
You in on that, or TBD? TBD.
Say that again?
I said, would you be in on that, or you got to wait and see?
Well, look, I would be in on it. I when I first saw the previews for Tulsa King, I'm like, oh, this looks terrible. And then my parents watched it and were like, no, you got to watch this. So I did, and I loved it. Like within an episode or two, I was all in. It's interesting though because what's the storyline? What's the concept?
Right.
For Sylvester Stallone coming from a mob family in New York,
right,
that makes sense, and he's being banished out there to Oklahoma. What are the roots for Samuel L. Jackson in this? Where's he coming from?
Oh yeah, it's
so
good.
That's what I would need to know.
Yeah, it's as soon as I saw it, I'm like, okay, Taylor Sheridan's showed the ability to pull some pretty big actors from time to time. I mean, and you even go back to 1923. I mean, I know for a fact Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren were not cheap, and that was a big time pull to get some big actors. And,
totally.
And now we look next, Travis, is the Yellowstone universe is kind of quiet right now, but eventually we'll probably get a 1944. Maybe we'll get the Beth and Rip spinoff coming soon. Like in terms of the Yellowstone universe, what are you most looking forward to next down the line with that guy?
Whatever they put out there to be consumed. Wasn't there supposed to be a 4-6s show with Jimmy? That was supposed to happen, but I guess it hasn't yet. Whatever they put out there to be consumed, I will watch it. But I will tell you this: I finally about a month ago started watching Stranger Things. I hadn't seen it before, so I finally got into it. I just finished season 3 a couple nights ago. And I'm all in, man. I want to make sure I get through season 4 before season 5 starts in November.
Okay, you'll have to tell me, and maybe next time when we catch up when you get back, because we're totally overdue to go grab a beer or something, Travis, and hang out for a minute.
Sure.
But, yeah, you'll have to tell me, because I remember how big it was when I was in school and how it was just like everybody's watching Stranger Things when it comes out. I never got into it when it was, back then, but now that it's still there, you'll have to fill me in on it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not a sci-fi guy at all,
Sure.
but I think it's a terrific show.
Got you. All right. Well, Travis, I'll let you get back to your evening in the Big Apple. And my man, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Always appreciate catching up with you, my friend. And we'll catch up here soon.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
Travis Demurs, Portland Trailblazers radio play-by-play voice, nice enough to join us here on the Rip City Drive. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll maybe get into some more Dame audio, get you guys ready for hour number 2 here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on this Tuesday afternoon. The Ozzy Osbourne tribute show continues here on the Rip City Drive as we pay homage to Ozzy, the legend that he was. We're going to have some music all afternoon. Big shout out to Travis Demurs for joining me last segment. That was an awesome conversation with TD. Really happy to catch up with Travis, and you can just hear the excitement he's got in his voice for getting ready for this next Blazers season, how excited he is for young Hansen. And I agree with him. I don't care what the national pundits say, folks. You can't quantify the leadership capability of having Dame and Jrue Holiday back with a core that showed such good things last year. So, again, is it a little maybe rose-colored glasses? Whatever. I don't care. I'm going to choose to think it's perfect until it's not. And I also love being able to catch up and talk some TV shows with Travis. Like, Travis and I are like simpatico in that way. We love it. We love the same kind of TV. He's getting into Stranger Things, so I might have to actually give that a fair whirl. Definitely haven't before, but talking all the Yellowstone stuff. I knew when I met Travis that we had some things in common and had a nice foundation. But then when I learned how much we like the same TV, I'm like, okay, we got the sports thing already dialed in, but we like the same kind of TV too. And Travis is my guy whenever I got to talk anything Yellowstone. And, man, it's coming up. We're going to blink. We're going to be in the fall. We're going to start to see a whole bunch of new shows. I didn't get a chance to mention the Madison to him. That's another Taylor Sheridan show coming out soon. So a lot to like from the Yellowstone universe, and really appreciate Travis Demurs catching up with me last segment. All right, we'll go ahead and take a break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll reset top of the hour. We'll get into some more Damian Lillard audio from his press conference yesterday. 4:20, we're going to be talking some Oregon State football, looking ahead. And then at 5 o'clock, we got Sean Hiken in studio for an entire hour. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon, second hour. Brendan Slaughter with you, filling in for Chad Doing today. He'll be back on the mic tomorrow, but pleased to be back with you guys. Been an awesome first hour. Got a chance to hear a little bit from Damian Lillard's press conference yesterday. We'll get into more of that here momentarily. Caught up with Travis Demurs. He was in New York City spending some time with family and obviously was able to give me his thoughts on the Damian Lillard return, Jrue Holiday to Portland, and just all the pieces. And, you know, I'm really excited for what Portland is going to be able to do with just this new roster. You know, maybe it's not, arms and, leaps and bounds, I should say, better. But at the very worst, it's exciting. And like Travis said, you go back to where we were a year ago. Blazers were coming off a really tough year. There wasn't necessarily a whole lot of things to, anchor on and get excited about. Now, that's not the case. So we'll see how everything ultimately shakes out. But very excited to see Dame back in Portland. And speaking of which, let's go ahead and get back into some of Dame's press conference. Let's hear what he and Chauncey Billups had to say about the current team. As I mentioned with Travis, and Travis mentioned as well, it was obviously a big-time family decision for Dame to come home, but it wasn't just a family decision. It was also a basketball decision, as Dame has liked what Portland's put down so far.
I think one thing that when we all sat down and, this idea kind of started to move towards me signing back here, obviously I'm going to look at the basketball situation. We play basketball and you want to win basketball games. So a lot of people, may look at it as a family decision, and obviously anybody would have their family be a part of a decision that they make, but this was just as much a basketball decision. I've watched the team even at a distance. I've followed and stayed in touch with what was going on, and looking at how the league is transitioning and how it's changing. It's not the same old thing no more. It's young teams that guard and that have depth and that compete, that are connected, and this team has all of those things. Maybe because it's Portland, people may not be willing to say it, but it's all there. From the talent to the depth to having it on both sides of the ball, it's all there, and that's something that I believed in when I looked into a decision like this. So the personal part, the family, the basketball, the fact that this opportunity came unexpected, being waived. It just felt like like I said, it just felt like the perfect timing and the perfect opportunity.
What you asked me again, man? Oh yeah, that's a long way from now. Obviously I'm more excited right now to have Dame back, and like he said, just pouring into our young guys. I want to see Scoop and Shaden take a step this year. Of course, I coach these guys very hard, but it's always different when you're getting that mentorship and that tutelage from a guy that wears a jersey. And to have Dame and to have Jrue and have these guys pouring into him, I'm really, really excited about that. And then when we get to that point, we get there, But I'm really excited about what we've been able to do this summer and what our team looks like right now. And when Dame is able to come back, we'll be super ready for him. But I'm really not even thinking about a year from now. I'm thinking about this year.
That was Portland Trailblazer guard Damian Lillard and Chauncey Billups talking about the fit. And, Dame, obviously being the competitor that he is, mentioned he was looking at the basketball part of it, and he likes, I think in 2 years, circumstances have somewhat changed in the sense that this is, you can kind of squint, as I said yesterday, and kind of see, man, there's some wing play that Dame didn't necessarily have in his prime with Tumani and Denny and Jeremy. That's a pretty good wing combination so far. There's defensive centers that Dame necessarily didn't have, some pretty good depth there at the center spot too. And like Travis was saying, this is one of the better defensive teams, that it could be. Like Dame could be stepping into one of the best defensive Blazer team he's ever been on, considering just the personnel and who's available. So I think that's definitely interesting as well. On the other side of the the other side of the coin, it was important for Dame to get home and be home with family. And excuse me, that was one of those things where his kids, which he has three, and obviously Dame Jr. and then his twins, they were not able to, like Travis and I were saying last hour, that was a big deal for Dame to be able to be across the country and not be able to be with his kids. And he talked about how important of an aspect it was to come back and be near his family.
It meant a lot. I mean, it's my kids, so it only made it that much sweeter. But to that same point, even when I wasn't here, I created a situation where I could still be with my kids as often as possible. So, like I said, that was part of it. It's well documented that I'm a family guy, and when you have kids, that's even more so the case. Once you have kids of your own. So, obviously, that's a part of that. It makes it that much better. But the same is to be said about basketball and what I've always wanted to accomplish in a Trailblazer uniform, and now looking at the team and it, in my opinion, being positioned to do, what I've always wanted to have opportunity to do.
Dame also talked about what it's going to be like to be back with the Portland fans.
It means a lot. I think it was something that I never wanted to happen to begin with. Even once it was like I knew I was being traded, like I don't know if I ever let it go. It was hard to let go, just the love that I have for Portland, the community, the organization, everything. It was a hard time. So I think over the course of my career, all of the fans, everybody throughout the community, I think they've always known that it was like genuine coming from me, by my actions and not by words. So I think when it was announced that I was coming back, I think those were the emotions. It wasn't just about basketball. I think it was everything, and people just happy and excited to have me back. Just as a presence and as a person, representing this city and the organization. And I think that, as a man, I think that means more than anything. When people respect who you are and what you bring to the table, on top of who you are as a player, and that's what them embracing me that way felt like.
Portland Trailblazers guard Damian Lillard, more audio from his press conference yesterday. I think the other question that got asked by our very own Sean Hiken, so I went ahead and left the question in this clip, but I think it's probably the one we all wanted to know regardless.
Hiken, Rose Garden Report. This would be for, I guess, both Joe and Dame. Is there any possibility at all that Dame plays this upcoming season, or is the understanding that this is just a rehab year?
We're going to do what's best for Dame. And, never say never in this world, but all that matters is him coming back to form. And that'll take as long as it takes, and we won't go a second faster than that.
My prideful self would be thinking differently, but I think that with age you get wiser. And like Joe said, it's going to be, ultimately what's best. And I think to take as much time as possible to make sure that I'm right, that's what I'll do.
As Dame mentioned very aproposly there, with age comes wisdom. And, sure, let's just say in a hypothetical world, Portland has a strong year. Let's just say they come out the gates and maybe they're competing for a play-in or one of the bottom playoff spots, and we're seeing the team take the next step. Then you might start to hear, some chatter like, could Dame come back for the stretch run, this, that. I like to hear that they are 100% behind Dame's timeline with this. I think the absolute worst thing that you could do when you're, have committed a couple years to obviously a guy coming off of an Achilles injury, you want him to be 100% when he's back. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, even if the Blazers have a good year. So I think it's definitely was a worthwhile question from Sean. But the answer I would have definitely expected, it's like never say never, but probably never kind of a thing, because, you really want to take it the right way with Dame and not have a situation where you're pushing him, you're wanting him to come back to, serve a certain role on the team. And that's why I think you've heard, kind of two different futures. The one with Dame this upcoming season, where he's going to be behind the scenes more as a mentor, versus the upcoming seasons in the future, where Dame's going to slide back into playing on the court and being, a version of Dame that we remember. And I go back to what Travis said last hour is if Dame comes back and is 80% of the player that he was at $14 million a year, that's going to be a steal of a rate. And he's going to be, the leadership aspect cannot be undervalued. And you look at the development that he'll be able to have for Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp and Jrue Holiday as well. There's a lot to like about Dame's return. And, there's overall just, good vibes coming out of this press conference yesterday. A couple more things to get to. Let's go ahead and talk about Dame when he spoke about the role he'll have when he's back on the court.
I think not playing, just wanting to still have an impact on the team and still be present with the team. I think when you've been around the league for as long as I have, and you've had as much experience as I've had on the floor every day in practice, just being in this league and having a significant role, it's a lot to share. It's a lot that you need time to learn in the NBA. A lot of things you just learn over your amount of time, and with this being a younger team, it's a lot of things that I can share, without having to be on the floor. And I think that'll be my main job this year. Like Chauncey said, I'm basically going to be like an assistant coach. So I'll be around, and, my investment in the team will be the same as if I was playing, as far as like my time and where my energy is placed. And, I think once I'm playing, it'll be the same. One thing that I've missed over the last 2 years playing on an older team is I'm able to be more and give more when I have something to pour into, when I'm able to be invested in others' careers more, being around younger players. So with this team, I have plenty of opportunity to do that, especially having a young rising point guard like Scoot that I'm going to be, playing with now, and Tumani and Denny and Shaden, who I was with his rookie year. So just being around those guys and having so much to share and being able to pour into them and be a part of, their continued progress is something that elevates me as a player and as a teammate and as a leader. So, I'm looking forward to that as well, even when I'm playing.
That's Dame talking about his role off the court while he recovers, and then his expected role when he gets back on the court. And you love to hear that. That's like leadership Dame coming out, and almost, dare I say, like dad Dame, where it's like, hey, I'm going to mentor these young guys. And he seems very pleased about where Scoot's development is and Shaden's development. And those are the important things, is getting this young core up to speed and eventually pointing this Blazer team towards the point of contention. So we'll continue a little bit more with Damian Lillard a little bit later this hour. We'll get to some more clips from yesterday's press conference. But coming up here in about 6 minutes, we're going to do an Oregon State football schedule deep dive into Oregon State's schedule for the upcoming season. Take a look at what we think for win-loss projections. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on this Ozzy Osbourne Tribute Tuesday. Again, we lost the great Ozzy Osbourne earlier today. We have Ozzy playing all throughout the show. Big shout out to producer Michael Shacker for hooking it up. Always, never a bad time, I should say, to hear Crazy Train. Man, it kind of takes me back. Remember even when I was first getting into, music in kind of middle school into high school. I remember I listened to Ozzy quite a bit. The Blizzard of Oz album. I can remember rocking that in the halls of Sherwood High back. I want to say back in the day, not really that long ago, but obviously a little before my time. But man, sure can respect the heck out of Ozzy's career, and we lost an icon. It's unfortunately losing people is part of natural parts of life, but that doesn't make it any more palatable or easy. It's unfortunate, and we've had a couple folks pass away in very public ways the last couple days. So definitely wishing the best to Sharon and the family. And yeah, like I said, losing a legend in Ozzy Osbourne. I can't tell you how many times, and it perfectly leads into our next segment, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard Ozzy rocking the speakers there at Reser Stadium. They played Crazy Train quite a bit back in the day, and man, it's just it's as good as it gets. But nevertheless, welcome back to the Rip City Drive, folks. Brendan Slaughter here with you. We're going to be diving in to Oregon State's football schedule now. If you want to join us, 503-248-0620, or find us on YouTube at Rip City Radio 620. We want to hear from you guys. Again, 503-248-0620. You want to talk Dame? We can talk some Dame. We're going to be diving into Oregon State here this segment, but we'd love to hear from you. Make sure to chime in. Fall camp is just around the corner for Oregon State and many other college football teams. I've heard that Oregon State's fall camp is going to start a week from tomorrow. That would be, let's look at the trusty calendar here and see where we're, I believe that is the 30th of July. So not even into August. We'll be kicking off fall camp football, I should say. Almost said spring football, but man, time just flies. And as always, stay tuned to me here on Rip City Radio and over at beaversedge.com for all the latest and greatest Oregon State content. If you are an Oregon State fan and are tuning into this radio station, highly encourage you to check out my stuff over at Oregon State's On3 site, beaversedge.com. We got great things working there, getting you ready for the start of the season. Position previews, questions ahead of fall camp. We're getting into opponent previews right now as well, diving into all of Oregon State's opponents. So definitely head over to On3. And, man, you want to talk some Beavs too? We got one of the best forums around at beaversedge.com, the damn board. Just head over to Beavers Edge On3 and check it out. We would love to have more folks join an awesome Oregon State site, and appreciate everyone for tuning in and listening to this particular segment as we're going to run through Oregon State's 2025 schedule, kind of give you guys my 2 cents on what I think they're going to be win-loss-wise this year, and kind of dive into it. So a couple weeks ago when I hosted last, I went down and ran through position by position what I think for Oregon State, and the general consensus is they've gotten better at pretty much everywhere. If there's one area that is still a little concerning ahead of fall camp, it's the offensive line. It's not for a lack of bodies or a lack of talent. It's just seeing it physically. Like, we go back to spring football, most of the offensive line was out due to injuries or injury recovery. So I'm very curious to kind of see when Mike Cavanaugh, offensive line coach, can kind of mesh all those pieces together and see what the best five group of guys is going to be for that offensive line. Knowing Coach Cav, they'll get a productive unit yielded. It just, at this point, we still are a little kind of guessing game, trying to figure out what that unit's going to look like. But outside of that, Oregon State is pretty well off. I mean, maybe a little bit of concern on the defensive line as far as just in terms of size, probably more bodies than size, more athleticism than size. Linebackers look to be solid. Defensive backs look to be solid. And then you go to the offensive side of the ball. I think receivers should be a position of better strength this year. Running back should be strong. And arguably the most important, as we discussed, Malik Murphy under center. You cannot quantify how huge it's going to be for Oregon State to have respectable and competent play under center consistently. And, you might go back and say, over the last few years, the Beavers had some good moments, and DJU brought some good moments, some not so great moments. Ben Gulbranson brought some great moments. I think of the Stanford Miracle. I think of the win over Oregon. But Ben Gulbranson also had some physical limitations for what he could do in Ryan Gunderson's offense at Oregon State. Then you go to Giovanni McCoy, last year starting quarterback. It just didn't fit. It just didn't quite work out, and you kind of saw that play out throughout the years. The Beavers ultimately ended up making the change and going to Ben for the latter half of the year. But when you're that old saying, when you don't have, or when you have two quarterbacks, or in Oregon State's case, when you have three quarterbacks, you really have none. And there wasn't really a guy in that room who just seized the job and said, this is mine. I'm going to be the leader of this team. Everyone fall in line behind me. Now with Malik Murphy, you've got that. And as we've seen in college football and even the professional ranks, if you have a quarterback, everything else can be covered up, addressed, so to speak. Like, you can have the most talented defense in football. If you don't have a guy at quarterback who can get it done and kind of has the moxie and all those other intangibles to kind of be like, yeah, I'm going to go eat your face off because I'm a quarterback that's going to win this game, like that burning desire to win. And that was the thing. That was a thing that particularly impressed me a couple years ago in the Pac-12 when you had three guys, in my opinion, borderline four, who were that way. And you go back to, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 2023 when the conference had Bo Nix, who is as good of a competitor as anybody out there, Michael Penix, same kind of thing, Caleb Williams, really a big-time competitor. And then even though I can't remember if it was one of the years he wasn't playing or not, I would have thrown Cam Rising from Utah in that mix too. Go back to, Utah having a couple Rose Bowl runs with Cam, and he was the same kind of guy where it's like, this is my team, I'm the leader, and I'm going to go, literally lay everything on the line to help my team get a win. And I think that's what Oregon State has now in Malik Murphy. And it was really impressive to talk to him in spring because all he wants to do is win. Like, that is his number one desire, is win, win, win. And not to say that that wasn't DJU's biggest desire a couple years ago, but I don't think winning was quite the most important thing to DJ as I've seen it to Murphy. And I think, naturally there's been a lot of Beaver fans who have been like, oh, Malik Murphy, just like DJU. And I can see where the comparisons could be, but as far as players, they're different players. Malik is more of a pocket style quarterback who will move if he needs to. He's athletic, but not his primary, desire, versus DJ, who could throw it all over the field, but really was great when they could have him go in like QB zone type packages and let him use his big frame to run and run past guys. But that was kind of just from my perspective, that was one of the big differences that I saw from Malik Murphy versus DJU, was just that innate desire to want to win. And again, I love DJ. DJ was one of the nicest kids I ever met. I remember the first interview I had with DJU when he got to Corvallis, and his talent was exceptional, and the Beavers, needed a strong quarterback that year. And, they went 8-5. They probably would have had a better year if a certain coach didn't decide to slither out of Corvallis and slither up to Michigan. But, that's a story for another day. And that season kind of at the end came off the rails a little bit in hindsight. And now all Oregon State fans know why, because their coach was taking interviews from elsewhere, and it may or may not have been secret information. So be that all as it may, I think when you consider Malik Murphy at this place at this time, I think he has the potential to do even more for Oregon State than DJU was able to do for Oregon State. And we go back to that year, we looked at DJU as kind of the missing piece. Like, hey, here's the quarterback to anchor with the strong running game and, improving receiver core and a strong defense. And the Beavers just were inconsistent that year and didn't quite have the same leadership from the year before when they had guys like Jaden Grant, that back end, who were big. So leadership is big in college football, and it's big, how the leadership is at the quarterback position and kind of, how they lead. Sometimes guys will just kind of follow in line. And to go, kind of getting into this year's schedule, I think with Malik Murphy under center, Oregon State's going to have a chance to be in almost all their games this year. Looking at the schedule, right off the bat, they open with Cal at home, night game, 7:30 at Reser Stadium, nationally televised. It's a tough game. It's not your typical typical FCS team, Sac State, Montana State, Idaho State, the teams that you would expect to maybe open a year with. So Oregon State gets a Power 4 team, an ACC opponent right off the bat. Good news for Oregon State in this matchup. They've got a much more cohesive returning team than Cal. Cal lost a lot of pieces from last year. Quarterback, running back, receivers. Defense returns a good bit, and I think that'll be the toughest thing for Oregon State to get by. But Cal's going to be going through a little bit of a transition year, and I think the opportunity to get them back after Cal obliterated Oregon State down in Berkeley this last season is definitely one Beaver players have circled, coaches have circled. And I think it's going to be a really great game as far as the first game goes. I think it's real close to a 50-50 game as far as, what the line's going to be when it comes out. I would expect Oregon State to probably be a 3-point favorite or less. It's going to be real close in that sense. But I will give Oregon State the nod. They're going to have a much more cohesive system at quarterback, running back, offensive line, maybe not quite as, cohesive. But across the board, if you look position by position, I like where Oregon State stands as opposed to Cal. The Bears always play great defense to start out the year, so I'm not expecting, anything crazy as far as point totals, but I could see, like a 24-21 win for Oregon State in week 1 against Cal. Move to week 2, Fresno State. The Bulldogs always seem to play Oregon State tough, and I know if there's any Oregon State listeners who can remember the ambush at Fresno years and years ago, and even a couple of years ago when Oregon State needed all of a Jack Coletto touchdown late to take down Jake Hayner in that 10-3 or 10-4 season, or 10-3 season, a couple years ago. So Fresno's interesting. Getting them at home is key because Fresno always plays really tough down there. Having them at home depends on what happens the week prior with Cal, but like Cal, Fresno State's also in a bit of a transition. They did not elect to retain their interim coach after this last year. Tim Skipper had filled in for Jeff Tedford after he had retired for medical issues the second time, and they went 6-7 this last year, made a bowl game. They lost it. Fresno State brought in former FCS national champion head coach Matt Entz from North Dakota State. It was a splashy, sexy hire, and I really think it's going to be good for Fresno State considering they've had guys like Kalen DeBoer in the past and been willing to look at those kind of rising up-and-coming coaches. I think Matt Entz is going to have them, really playing good football at a certain point. I don't know if it'll happen in year 1, especially in just the third week of the college football season, week 2 for Oregon State. I like Oregon State in this matchup, too. I think they've got a strong chance to start 2-0, and they'll need to because the next 2 games particularly tough. So after 2 games, I've got Oregon State 2-0, and then we head into a real tough stretch on the road. Texas Tech is up next down in Lubbock, and as I look at this game, barring Oregon State playing, an elite game, I think this is going to be a real tough matchup, and I could see this coming as a loss for the Beavs. Texas Tech is kind of a dark horse team in the Big 12 as being one of the stronger teams in the offseason. They're preseason number 16. They got nice pieces in the transfer portal, good returning pieces, and this is going to be a really challenging game. If you're Oregon State and you go 2-0, take down Cal and Fresno State, maybe as you look at this and maybe things break your way, you play a great game, maybe you have a chance to upset Texas Tech. I'm not saying this one's impossible, but it's going to be really tough. It's going to be hot in Lubbock that time of year. It's a tough place relatively to play, and I think that's just going to be a tough game for Oregon State. Following Texas Tech, so let's just say for sake of argument, I've got them at 2-1 right now. A September Civil War. Say what you will about the conference exploding. Maybe the one thing that I selfishly enjoy, it's seeing these Civil War games in September. Because last year, man, it was like, 75, 80 degrees at Reser Stadium when that game kicked off. I know it's maybe not the old days, how a Civil War is supposed to be cold, maybe even a little rainy December, end of November game. But I'm here for the nice weather games, and, this will be the new future. We just got to adjust to it if Oregon State and Oregon continue to play each other, and that's going to mean, games in September. Oregon, while I don't think they're going to be quite as strong this year, this is, again, purely Brendan's objective view of Oregon. I think Dan Lanning can recruit like nobody else. I think that their talent level is like nobody else, and I think, quote, a bad season for Oregon now with where they're at as a program is probably in the 8-4 to 9-3 range. And that's just a credit to what Dan Lanning has been able to build. However, I'm not as sold on Dante Moore as others. Obviously, the Ducks had Dylan Gabriel last year and Bo Nix the 2 prior years. Dante Moore's interesting. Obviously was a very, very talented kid and probably has all the athletic abilities to throw the ball all over the field. But the last time I saw Dante Moore with my eyes, he was struggling as a true freshman playing for UCLA and had a tough game against Oregon State back in his true freshman season. So in that sense, I'm sure he's developed and grown with his year, sitting behind, Dylan Gabriel and now kind of being the guy in Oregon's system. But nevertheless, I bring back facts and numbers, folks. Oregon State has won at Autzen Stadium just one time in my lifetime. I'm almost 30 years old. 2007 will reign true for Beaver fans that remember, but it's just not a place that Oregon State has a lot of success in. And barring a 3-0 start where Oregon State takes down Cal, Fresno, and then looks good against Texas Tech, as much as I want to say, hey, this is the year Oregon State goes down and, gives Oregon a scare. And I will say there have been moments, I go back to 2019, there's been a few moments where Oregon State has, maybe put a little bit of worry into Oregon, but Oregon always seems to play good at Autzen Stadium against the Beavers. And, I've been at those games for many of the last, handful of road games over the last decade, and it's a tough place to play. And if you're asking me right now, I give Oregon the nod. All right, so through 4 games, we got the Beavers sitting at 2-2. We'll go ahead and we'll go through 2 more games, and then we'll go ahead and take our break, and we'll continue on the other side of the break. But we'll get to the halfway point, which got 1 more home game for Oregon State before they go back on the road. After the Oregon matchup, it is a short week where they play Houston at Reser Stadium on Friday, September 26th. This is another one of those games that's a real kind of coin flip right now. I think Houston is a solid program, not obviously elite, but solid. And on paper right now, as you look, kind of seem to be a bit in Oregon State's level. These are those 50-50 games Oregon State has to win if they want to have a good season. It's a Friday night at Reser, national TV. I'm giving the Beavers the nod here. I think if they were to slip their previous 2 games, I think they get back, get off the schneid, so to speak. They sit 3-2 after Houston. Then they go to App State. And this is one of those big kind of season kind of defining games. The road has always been a little tougher for Oregon State than playing at home. They've been consistently really good at home. Appalachian State, it's tough because Appalachian State, they typically have a pretty good program. That stadium up in Boone, North Carolina can be a little tough to play at, just kind of being a small, very Reser-like environment. And I imagine that's going to be a real tough game, cross-country flight for Oregon State. But considering that I think they're a little bit better than App State going into the year, I'll give them the nod. Think they win their second straight. Have them at 4-2 after 6 weeks. So go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll continue with the final 6 games of the schedule. Again, in Brendan's early, without any pencil, not pen predictions, so far have Oregon State at 4-2 after 6 games. We'll continue the schedule when we come back here on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Brendan Slaughter with you as we continue here on the Ozzy Osbourne themed Tuesday. Continuing on with the Oregon State schedule, and then coming up here at the top of the hour, we're going to have Sean Hiken live in studio. Definitely excited to get Sean's thoughts and see, honestly, how many frequent flyer miles Sean's racked up recently, because I feel like he's been all over the place. Definitely excited to talk to him, Dame's press conference, everything else. But finishing up our topic from last segment, we have Oregon State sitting at 4-2 after their first 6 games of the season. I think it's a pretty respectable, pretty fair mark, losing who they're going to lose to most likely, probably taking care of business, beating who they're supposed to beat. After Game 6, let's move on to Game 7. That's a home matchup against Wake Forest. Wake Forest obviously now has Jake Dickert as their head coach. He left Washington State to go to Wake Forest. I don't quite know what to make of the Demon Deacons yet this year. This is a game that's the fact that it's at home helps Oregon State out. I don't know quite how good they're going to be this year and kind of need to dive into them a little bit more. But naturally, it being a home game for Oregon State, I'll give them the nod. I don't think Wake Forest is going to be particularly great in year 1 under Dickert, but nevertheless, that's still a familiar foe that will be coming back to Reser Stadium. So let's say, for the sake of argument, let's put Oregon State at 5-2. Then we get the cupcake on the schedule. There's only one for Oregon State this year, and it comes in mid-October against the Lafayette Leopards. No, not like anyone else, folks. Didn't think when the schedule came out, I was like, oh, like Louisiana Lafayette, right? Like the Ragin' Cajuns? I think a lot of people know who the Ragin' Cajuns are. And I was like, oh, no, like the Lafayette Leopards. So this is Oregon State's, FCS gimme this year. Nothing really much to say here. This is going to be a cruise win for Oregon State, and if things fall suit, we would have them at 6-2 at this mark. They then have their first bye week of the season coming after the 8th game of the year. Again, we have them now at 6-2 and have their first bye week. It's kind of interesting that they will play that many games before they have their first bye. Not ideal, but just the way the schedule broke down. So they'll have a bye week. Then the first of 2 matchups with Washington State. Play Washington State both home and road this year, kind of a cool little quirk with the Pac-12. We'll play the Cougars at home on November 1st and then on the road November 29th. Simply, I know the Cougars aren't supposed to be as good this year. They lost Mateer, they lost Jake Dickert, but still made a pretty good hire in the offseason. I expect Oregon State and Washington State to split these 2 games. I'm not sure who wins where, but just the way the schedule breaks, I think it would be really hard for one team to win both games, especially within just a month. So if we assume that, let's just say, for the sake of argument, Oregon State is 7-3 after those 2 matchups with Washington State. That leaves a home matchup with Sam Houston and a road matchup with Tulsa. So again, not teams that you'd be ridiculously concerned about. And there's obviously a path I see where Oregon State could win those 2 games and be 9-3 and have losses to Tech, Oregon, and then maybe Washington State. Maybe you beat Washington State twice and you drop one to Appalachian State. But I think if Oregon State takes care of business and beats who on paper they are capable of beating, I could see an 8-4, 9-3 campaign this year. I think it'd have to be something pretty special to go knock off Texas Tech or Oregon on the road. And, maybe the season is still really special and you don't lose a game besides those 2 road games. Not necessarily likely from what I've seen, but I think an 8-9 win season would be pretty on par for a good season with Oregon State staying healthy, not running into any, kind of issues they had last year with inconsistent play. On the lower end of the spectrum, I'd be pretty shocked if, barring an injury to Malik Murphy, the Beavers can't wrestle 6 wins out of the schedule. I know we said that last year, but when you consider the injuries they had last year, it was easily the most injured defense I had seen since covering the team back in 2014. So the odds of that happening again are slim to none. And, the schedule's a little tougher. You have some 50-50 opponents that, could get you. You could get them. So we're really going to need to see what kind of team Oregon State fields this year. And we'll get a better idea of that in fall camp. And again, stay tuned to beaversedge.com. Oregon State's On3 affiliate, as me and a couple other of our writers over there are going to have everything ready for you guys come fall camp. Beavers fall camp starts in just over a week. We got a great introductory deal right now. You can sign up and join On3 for very, very little. Get access to the Athletic as well. Some very cool things we got working at On3. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, very pleased to have Sean Hiken in studio for the entire final hour of the show. Again, got to catch up with Sean on everything from Young Hansen to Damian Lillard back. It's going to be an awesome conversation. You don't want to miss it. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Tuesday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Pleased to have in studio our Rip City Radio Rose Garden Report correspondent, Sean Hiken, joining us here live in studio. Sean, how are things and how many frequent flyer miles have you racked up recently?
Not as many miles as you would hope, just because I don't get to just choose which airline I fly.
Sure.
For an airport like Portland, that's not like a central hub to one of the big national airlines. You just kind of go where you get on whatever flight you can get on. So I wish I could say that I have like Platinum United status or whatever, but I don't.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because, I saw, recently read one of your things over at Rose Garden Report, how you mentioned, subscribe because it helps us do things like travel and those kind of things. And, from when I'm not here at Rip City Radio, I'm working at beaversedge.com, and it's the same kind of thing where it's like, hey, the more you can support, the more we can travel.
You want to go to those road games.
Exactly. So I definitely get that for sure. And yeah, you're always, in that sense, Sean, you're always looking for the best deal. Like, I'm not angling to go like red eyes, but I'm like, I got to wait in an airport for like an extra hour and it saves me some time. Like,
if we really want to, you want to really get into it, I had literally the worst travel day of my entire life on last Wednesday. If we want to go like sports writer complaining about travel accommodation stuff, we can if you want. But,
yeah, let's do it.
So I was in Vegas until, I was in Vegas through Tuesday.
Okay.
And then on Wednesday, I was flying from Vegas to Indy for the WNBA All-Star Game. And so I have a flight out of Vegas into O'Hare, which I get into O'Hare just fine. That flight is that gets in at like 3 p.m.
Right.
Supposed to fly out at like 6. Get off the plane, turn my phone on. I get a notification that flight was canceled, and they rebooked me onto a 6:45 a.m. flight the next day. So I go talk to the help desk.
Yep.
And they put me on standby for a flight that is supposed to get out at 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
That flight gets delayed from 10 p.m. to 12:45 a.m.
Oh, no.
So I go talk to the desk, and I was just like wanting to check in on my maybe half an hour before the flight's going to board. I want to check on my where I'm at on the standby, and
Sure.
they're like, oh, you're number 2 on the standby list. We
Okay.
have some spots opening up. You should be fine. 10 minutes after they tell me that flight gets canceled.
Oh.
So I actually have to sleep basically on the floor of the terminal at O'Hare and get on that 6:45 a.m. flight. And here's the worst part. You know how, I'm sure you've had this happen before, when you have a flight that like gets canceled or
Sure.
something, you can, talk to them and they can give you like
Sure.
some flight credit or
Yeah.
something, just something for the inconvenience.
Yeah.
So I went to them and I was like, hey, so like you guys just delayed my travel by 12 hours. Like what's up with with like some sort of flight credit? And they're like, well, since it's weather-related cancellation, that's actually not our fault, so we can't give you any kind of compensation for it.
Come on.
That was pretty much the only bad part of that 10 days that I was out on the road doing stuff. But it was that was certainly like, I put it this way, I haven't had a really bad travel experience like that in a few years, so I was kind of overdue for it.
Okay. Yeah, no, for sure. Like instantly I have to ask, and if you don't want to, but what airline? What airline off the top? If you don't want to say, you don't have to.
American.
Okay.
But you know what though? Like
I've hit him with all of them before, man.
that's the thing,
Yeah.
man. Like people say like, they have a bad experience like this. It's just like complaining about your, like, oh, I hate Verizon because they overcharged me for this. It's like AT&T isn't better. Like all of
Exactly.
all of the major airlines are about
Right.
the same. You're going to have good experiences on some of them. You're going to have bad experiences. It's like,
Yeah.
so I don't want to like put American on
No, for
blast,
sure.
because I've had plenty of experiences flying with American that have been totally fine.
Oh, for sure. And to that point, like, I think you kind of, to that point, Sean, I think you kind of expect, like, and it just is what it is. If you fly Spirit or Frontier, expect some issues.
I'm not doing that. I have, that's kind of my.
That's your line?
That's my line. If an airline doesn't support TSA PreCheck, I'm not doing it.
Oh, and that's the other thing, man. And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it's one of those things that I wish maybe I shouldn't be speaking on it, Sean, because when I got it, I'm like, oh, this is kind of a cool little secret. Now it seems like everybody's got TSA PreCheck, and that line seems to be even a little bit more busy each time. I think it's catching on how nice it is to just go, do your fingerprints, do your little thing, and all of a sudden, then you don't got to take laptop out of the bag. I know shoes is for everybody now, but still some minor conveniences are nice.
Well, the new one is clear, which is
Yes.
The one where they like scan your eyeballs.
Yes.
I just got that recently
okay.
because
Got you.
they just put that in at PDX.
Nice.
You didn't used to offer that at PDX. That one's a little bit more expensive, but I've used that on the last couple of trips that I've taken, and it's even faster than pre-check. So it's a good if you're someone like me that travels a fair amount, it's a good investment, especially. And I guess this is a way to kind of segue into the Blazer stuff that people, again, people don't really want to hear sports writers complaining about travel accommodations. That's like, you want me to talk about like the last Bruce Springsteen concert that I went to, if you want to talk about sports writer cliches, but like,
yeah, no, for sure.
But like, I'm hoping to be doing a lot more road travel with the Blazers this upcoming season, because just being down in Vegas for the week that I was down in Vegas, I don't think people are prepared for how big this Jan Hansen thing is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be big. And just to kind of close that conversation, Sean, so real quick, just one last, did you have to still do standby for that 6:45 flight?
No. They had rebooked me on that flight, so I was good for that flight.
Yeah.
I just was hoping, I would have liked to get on that 10 p.m. flight.
Right. So to your point, I can remember, I have a little bit more of a soft spot for airlines than others, as my sister and brother-in-law work for Alaska Airlines. So I'm definitely an Alaska snob of sorts.
No, I like Alaska,
but
they don't really fly anywhere besides like on the West Coast.
Yes, definitely.
Like my flight to Vegas was a nonstop on Alaska, and it was fine.
Oh yeah, and to that point, not too long ago, I was flying cross country, and I did a Portland to Miami, and it was when they did. I think they still have that direct flight. But long story short, Sean, like my family works for the airline and all these things. And there was a little mishap on the plane with I'm like any sports writer, you're taking advantage of riding on the airplane, right?
Sure, with the Wi-Fi.
Yes, and they're coming through grabbing trash, right? From everybody. And I don't know if this flight attendant kind of missed, but all of a sudden he grabs a muffin from another guest that's needing to be thrown away. He misses the bag. The muffin goes all over my computer.
Oh no!
And to your point, Alaska hooked me up, gave me like 20,000 miles for that little experience, and was like, hey, here's or maybe it was a credit or something but regardless, it made like the next flight. I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. So, it's always nice when you get those little perks. But your point about the transition just to how big, and I mentioned it a little bit with Travis Demurs back in hour one, is just the sheer numbers, Sean. And when you look at it, like, again, I don't have the exact, but it's like, there's 300 and some million people in the United States, right? And not every one of them is a basketball fan. Then you go to China, and again, just numbers I've seen, I don't know this for a fact, but it was something like 500-600 million basketball fans in China. Like, is it cliche to think that if like Jan Hansen's like moderately a solid rotation player, like he could have like a Yao Ming like viewership surge coming from China?
So think about it this way. Well, first of all, yes. I mean, all we need to do is see that 5.2 million people watched one of their Summer League games on the broadcast that they had in China, which that's how many people watch playoff games in the U.S. So,
that's a lot.
And that many people are watching a Summer League game in China. Imagine if he plays and he's actually good once the regular season starts, which, based on what we've seen out of Summer League, I think there's a real chance that they might have drafted an actual NBA player, and this isn't just a novelty.
Right.
But to your point about that, you just gave us those stats about how there's 500 or 600 million people in China who are huge basketball fans. There have only been, not counting Yang, because he hasn't actually played in an NBA game yet. There have been 8 players born in China that have ever played in an NBA game. The only one that's ever like had any kind of notable career is Yao Ming. So like the other ones that we're talking about are like Yi Jinlan, who was a lottery pick, but he never really did anything in the league. So the bar is pretty low for Hansen. If he's even like a decent rotation player, he doesn't even have to be an all-star. If he's just like a good rotation player, he's the second best Chinese player ever.
Which, like just to think about that in that context, like you said, not a high bar, but like I can remember, Sean, obviously I was a pretty young kid, but I can remember the kind of Yao mania.
Absolutely.
With the Rockets and how just, popular of a team Houston was when Yao Ming was there. And I can remember, the one playoff series where Portland played against Yao Ming and those Rockets back then and didn't go Portland's way, but I was like, man,
and that was like the last time Yao was ever, because remember, like the next round when they beat Portland in that series,
right?
They then play the Lakers in the next round, and Yao breaks his foot, and he misses the entire next season. And then I think he comes back and plays like 2 games in the next season and gets like so that Blazers series
Right.
in the first round in 09 was the last fully healthy playoff series that Yao ever played in his career.
That's crazy when you think of it. I just, maybe it's hindsight of me being 13 at the time, but I remember sitting there watching my buddy. Like, I remember Yao just having a great series.
Yao is one of Yao. If you want to talk about, people always a fun sports radio debate topic is which guys from previous eras would and wouldn't be good in the current era and vice versa. Yao would be so like you want to talk about like passing big men like Jokic and guys that can step out. And I don't think he ever really went out to 3-point range, but he probably could have if that was part of the game. Yao would have been so good in the current version of the game.
Yeah, I would have a tendency to agree. I mean, you talk about the size, I think ultimately, his injuries kind of did him in.
Which, I mean, you look at like how many big, you even talk about like a guy like Bill Walton.
Right.
And he just goes, when you're that big, it's like your body is not meant to be as big as somebody like Yao Ming, who is not just that he's 7'6". I've actually been in the same room as him before. He is like as wide as like me and you put together. It's like
so just a massive human being.
And when you're that big, it's just a lot of weight that you're gonna have that your body is gonna have to support. And so that those types of stress injuries to his lower body, like it was the foot that ended up ending his career.
Right.
That stuff's gonna happen. It's actually kind of amazing that he was able to play as long as he did and stay healthy and have the career that he did, given the deck being stacked against him in that way. But yeah, to your point about how much of a phenomenon it was A, the fact that he's from China and
right.
that that country is so big and there weren't that many Chinese players. B, the fact that he's so big. Like he's even like as much as like Shaq was like a phenomenon because he's like such a big guy and a big personality. Yao was like dwarfs over Shaq and from a physical standpoint. Like I've seen a picture of the two of them standing next to each other and he makes Shaq look tiny.
Yeah.
And then also just the way, and I think Hansen has a little bit of this too, the way that he plays and just how fun he is to watch with like the kind of passes that he's throwing. It's like it all kind of blends together as like it's not just that he's from China. It's not just that he's this tall. It's not just that he's this fun to watch. It's like all three of those things. And I think I'm certainly not going to sit here before Young Hansen has ever played a game in the NBA and compare him to a Hall of Famer and one of the best big men of his era. But you can see a pathway to there being a little bit of that phenomenon for the Blazers over the next couple of years while we figure out how good this guy actually is or isn't.
Yeah, and it's curious because, I agree with you. And the biggest thing there is, like, Yao and Young Hansen, like, their body styles are different, right? And I think Hansen's kind of slender but still tall and room for muscle frame kind of will allow him to maybe have a longer career.
Yeah.
And to your point, like, you think about, like, just what the difference would be, like, for instance, like, I think right now the best player in the NBA is Nikola Jokic.
Most people would agree with you.
From Serbia. Imagine if Serbia had 1.3 billion people.
I have friends who work for the DNVR, which is a media outlet in Denver. They did a documentary a couple of years ago. I forget the name of it, but it's for free you can watch it for free on YouTube. It's like an hour-long documentary that they did about them going over to Serbia one summer to watch Nikola Jokic play in it was either Eurobasket or like one of these international tournaments that he was playing in with the Serbian national team. And the guys that cover the team for DNVR, because they cover Jokic, were treated as celebrities like when they got off the plane just because everybody in Serbia who's an NBA fan was like watching their videos and like their live streams, their podcasts on YouTube, and they knew who they like. And that's Serbia, which Serbia is a big country with a big basketball culture and stuff. It ain't China.
Only 6.6 million people in Serbia. Like I can't get over these numbers, man. It's
pretty unfathomable.
The numbers are crazy. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the RipCityDrive. We'll continue with Sean Hiken when we get back, get more of his thoughts on Summer League, continue our conversation here on the RipCityDrive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Tuesday afternoon. Pleased to still have in studio Sean Hiken from the Rose Garden Report, continuing our conversation. You know, Sean, just last segment we were talking about the kind of just almost enigma in a positive way that young Hansen has been for this Portland Trailblazers team. And I'm kind of curious, just diving into the basketball part of it, what impressed you the most about him when you were down in Summer League?
So, and this is probably something you're not going to see on TV because everybody's seen the stuff that's been on all the highlights, like the passes. And
Sure.
He had the dunk. He had a couple of nice moves to the basket. He had a couple blocks. The thing that really impressed me seeing it in person. So at Summer League, I don't know if have you ever been to Summer League before?
I haven't had the pleasure yet.
So,
but eventually.
So
Hopefully.
they have media sitting right on the baseline,
Okay.
right behind the basket.
Yeah.
Close enough to be able to actually hear what goes on the court.
Sure.
And keep in mind that Hansen does not really speak like basically any English at all in terms of everyday conversation. He uses a translator pretty much for everything.
Hard, yeah.
But he knows enough basketball terminology that if he's yelling, he can yell something out on the court to his teammates. You'll hear him yell like, cut or get back. Like he yells enough and he says enough that on the court that his teammates, even though he doesn't actually speak the language, his teammates know what he's trying to say and what he's trying to communicate and what he's trying to do. And, you know, he's pretty vocal out there. He's directing traffic a lot of the time, like which, you know, for a guy whose, you know, strength is supposed to be as a facilitating big man.
Sure.
That's something that you want. And so the fact that that's already at this level with him basically starting from zero on being able to speak the language. Imagine like a couple years from now, once he's been in America for a little bit and his English has gotten a lot better, like how much better that part of it is going to be. So that definitely impressed me, I would say, the most out of anything.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be easy, Sean. I mean,
No.
I'll just, you know, I'll share the story that relates to Brendan, Sean. Again, even still, like one of my biggest regrets is like not learning to speak Spanish. And I remember in high school, I was just like, oh yeah, I just got to get through it, right? And like, even just barely getting enough Spanish to like pass the class. And like, Sean, if you ask me now, like, hey, Brendan, say something. Nope. Like, you know, maybe a few things here or there. But then and again, I don't pretend to be super well versed in Chinese and the language, but I've seen a few things that say like the vowels are very different. The letter, like just everything.
And there's like 3,000. I have a friend who's Chinese who was like telling me about like, you know, giving me advice on like, this is what you should try to learn if you're going to try to pick up a little bit of it.
Yeah.
There's like 3,000 different. He said, don't even bother trying to learn how to read it because there's like 3,000 different characters you'd have to memorize. And there's just no way, unless you do a total immersion, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. So I cannot imagine somebody like Hansen going, and really for any, you know, player coming into a different, because I mean, remember Yao didn't really speak any English when he first came into the league. He, you know, eventually like learned some because he was over here for 10 years. But I also remember a few years ago when the Blazers brought over Ibu Badji from Senegal, he barely spoke. He spoke like 3 or 4 other languages. He spoke Spanish and French, and he spoke a couple of African languages.
Impressive.
But his English was still very, very, like I did a story on him during his rookie season, and I think I might have done like the first interview that anyone had ever done with him in English, because he just like, he was like an end of bench, like two-way guy that nobody was really trying to interview, but he just had like really had not had a lot of experience like speaking English. And so we got through the interview and I was able to get enough of what he was saying to be able to write the story. But then I talked to him again that year at Summer League in Vegas, and I did another interview with him, and I told him like afterwards that I thought that like his English had got, even just in the like 4 months since the last time I interviewed him, I told him like I thought his English had gotten a lot better. And he said like, you know, when I see you in the locker room, I want you to like come talk to me so that I can work on like my English. And so like I think there's gonna be like and you know Hansen has his translator Chris is like the guy that's been with him for 5 years. He's, you know, I think that's gonna be really helpful for him. But that's the part of it that I think is just like, besides just the basketball part of it, like it's so, you know, obviously, you know, people were kind of surprised by the pick, and then we saw him at Summer League and he actually looked a lot better, I think, than people expected. For me, as somebody that covers the team, if they had just drafted, like if they had stayed 11 and made it like a kind of a chalk pick, like, I don't know, like Carter Bryant or
Sure.
something, just name any of the guys
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we spent the last 2 months talking about
Right.
before the draft. And it's like, all right, they draft another young guy, could end up being pretty good. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. This is just a whole different part of my brain as somebody like thinking about story ideas and like having to think about stuff in a totally different way than I did. And like I was, down in Vegas, there were like probably 24 Chinese reporters
Wow.
and media outlets that were covering all of their games and practices. And I was just talking to like a lot of them is like spoke enough English that you
Sure,
could have.
sure.
They weren't fluent, but like they spoke enough English that like you could have a conversation with them.
Right.
And so I was like, I was like asking them questions about like which NBA players are popular in China and which ones aren't. You want to hear something really funny that one of them told
Shoot.
me?
Yeah.
The most popular player from last year's draft class in China, who would you think it would be?
Yeah, Mike, let me guess. Let me pull up last year's draft class real quick so I can at least have.
There is an obvious person that you would think it would be, but it is not.
Okay, so we're talking most popular player in China.
From the 2024 draft class. And it's a player, the player that you would think it would be a player who is part Chinese, who was picked in the top 10.
Okay, but it's not him.
And it's not him.
Okay. I'm trying to think of just go on a limb and say Matas Buzelis?
No, he's Lithuanian. He's
Okay.
not.
Okay.
No, Zach Edey is the one you would think it would be
Right.
because he's part Chinese.
Okay.
But they don't like him over there because he claims Canada more than he claims China, and he plays for the Canadian national team, and they don't
Okay.
like that. And so because of that,
Really?
their favorite player from that draft class is Donovan Clingan because he was his rival in college. They don't like Zach Edey, so they like Clingan because he was his rival in college.
Really?
So like
I would have had no guess. You could have never.
See, that's the thing. I thought like stuff like that is so interesting, and it's like like Scoot I think is pretty popular over there because he did like a tour over there with Puma last
Sure.
summer. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff that I'm just like I've never really spent that much time considering which players are and aren't popular in China. So this is like a whole education for me. So it's like a part of the job and a part of covering the team that's just whether the kid turns out to be good or not. It's just been a totally different, like just like completely thrown a totally different wrinkle into, following the team and covering the team. That's been pretty fascinating and, exciting to me to kind of sink my teeth into a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it continues to be, right? I mean, we've talked for 30 minutes, and I don't think we've even mentioned Dame's return.
Yeah,
because
that's kind of a story.
because young Hanson's been so
Dame's return, the arena stuff, like the silver, like there's a lot going on with the team right now.
There
and
is.
and like we haven't even scratched the surface of the young Hansen part of it. So
exactly, and that's one of the things I mentioned. And Travis Demurs, when I had him first hour, kind of mentioned, Sean, was like, just imagine where we were a year ago, and I'm talking Blazer fans.
Yep.
And think about how much better the vibes are.
Oh
and
my
that's
God.
just purely the vibes and how maybe
So-
excited you are. And you asked me that. When was the last time you were this excited for Blazer team? And we went back to maybe before COVID.
So think about a year ago. So they had just won 21 games. Not only do they win 21 games, they barely got, and we've talked about this plenty of times over the year, like they barely got anything out of last season because all of their guys, like Shaden Sharp only played 30 games. Scoot was pretty rough his rookie year, and he missed some time also with injuries. Like pretty much the only positive from last season was Tumani Kamara being kind of an unexpected,
Contributor. Yeah.
contributor after they got him in the Dame trade. But everything else was pretty much a throwaway of a season, and they can't really look at anything as a positive. So they have that season. They got blown out by 62 different times in that season. There was the weird stuff with Chauncey and Phoenix last offseason where everybody knew that Chauncey was probably not going to be back after this past season, and there were the rumors about him trying to get to Phoenix or Kevin
Sure.
Durant trying to get him to Phoenix. There was all that stuff going on. They came into the lottery with the fourth best odds for the number one pick. They fell back 3 spots to 7. They draft Clingan, and Clingan, like most people liked the pick, and it made sense as a pick, but it was like kind of a chalk pick. It
Sure.
wasn't something that people were super like excited about. And then, they do the trade for Denny Avdia, who people think is pretty good, but I think most Blazer fans probably didn't watch that much Washington
No.
Wizards and thought it was weird that a team that's rebuilding gave up multiple first-round picks to get a player.
Right.
And again, Scoot didn't have a great rookie season compared to, what the hype was when he got drafted. And so, like, you go into the season and it just had this vibe of like, okay, just got to get through it. Like, just, get through these next couple of years. Maybe one of these young guys is going to pop. Now it's like, okay, they had this second half of the season where they went 23-18, and it seemed like they actually had some legitimate progress. You saw Scoot get a lot better. You saw Shaden get a lot better.
Right.
You saw, how well Tumani and Denny played the second half of the season. And, Chauncey gets his extension. Everybody's feeling great about it. And that's by the last day of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Then fans have been screaming about how they need to trade Anthony Simons for years. They finally do that. They bring in Drew Holiday, which, there are people who don't love that contract, but like Drew Holiday is a winning player a player that you trade that I think is going to be really good for Scoot and Shaden to have on the court.
And talk about an ambassador.
Absolutely.
I've heard just tremendous things about he and his wife, what they do to the community.
So have
all
I,
that.
yeah. And so that's a thing people are happy about. Then they draft Hansen, which once we get past the, like, what is this? Who could have seen this coming?
Yeah.
Once you start to dig into it a little bit, and then especially once you see what he did at Summer League and get to know kind of his personality, people are excited about that. The team is up for sale, which, we'll see how that ends up landing. But, fans have been screaming about wanting Jody and Bert to sell the team forever, and now that's happening. So people are happy about that.
Right.
Again, we'll see where it lands and whether it's actually a better situation. But that's happening. And then, they bought out DeAndre Ayton. And so now all the fans that were mad last season about how Chauncey was playing the veterans too much and doesn't giving the young guys enough time. Well, they just cleared up a whole bunch of runway for Donovan Clingan and Young Hansen to basically be the center rotation. Throw WAP in there a little bit, but he's he's kind of more of a situational guy, and Rob's never healthy. So it's going to be Young and Clingan playing most of the minutes. So people are excited about that. And then, by the way, Dame's coming back.
Right.
Again, I just ran through like 10 different things before I even got to the thing that everybody's been talking about for 2 years since he got traded to Milwaukee.
I mean, like, to your point, like, I think, the other thing that, it's like they bought out DeAndre Ayton, and I think, when you look at Donovan Clingan and Young Hansen now, that move makes sense. And to your point, like, the fact that you just don't know what you can get from Robert Williams. And, no, and to be honest, in a purely joking, fun fashion, Sean, at least DA won't have to worry about ice in LA. So that is a non-concern
right. Yeah,
for DA in
the roster. The only thing I think that would make fans feel better about the way that this offseason went is if they can find a way to trade Jeremy Grant. But I just don't think that's going to happen because I think we're seeing the way that the free agency stuff played out this year. Teams are so hesitant to take on big salaries like that.
And it is big.
And Jeremy, I don't think the Jeremy thing is going to be this negative asset forever. I think, and especially if he's playing with a guy like Hansen, who seems like he makes guys around him better. Like, I think Jeremy could rebuild his value, but it's like he's making a ton of money. He definitely had a down year last year, so he doesn't have a ton of value right now. That's the only thing. If there was any note on, things that you wish this offseason they could have gotten done this offseason, that's the one thing you could say, yeah, maybe they should have found a way to do that, or maybe they mishandled that situation or whatever else.
Yeah.
But other than that, pretty much on every level, like, I don't know when the last time there was this much goodwill towards the organization, because now it's like, not only is Dame back, but Dame is back at this point in his career where he's not going to play next year. So he's kind of in a different, we know he's not going to play next year. We don't know what he's going to look like coming back from the torn Achilles. But you also are probably never going to have to hear about, like, oh, is Dame going to request a trade if the team isn't good enough? Is he going to does he want to push somewhere else to get like the stuff that it was for like 5 years before he finally did it? So we just don't have to think about that. And that's something as a reporter, I don't have to deal with that stuff anymore.
Right.
So everything just seems like, and again, the sale, I think, is the big thing that's hanging over everything. And we're going to see how that plays. And, Adam Silver said last week that the team is probably going to need a new arena once it gets sold. So that's going to be something that is going to have to get figured out in the next few years, and that's going to be hanging over it all. But as far as the on-court stuff, they had a really good second half of the season. People are excited about it. Chauncey upgraded his coaching staff, so even people that weren't happy that he got the extension, you can say at least they made some moves to put him in more of a position to succeed. The roster, I think, definitely makes a lot more sense. And this Hansen thing is whether he ends up being a star or not, like, people are going to be tuning in to see how it goes,
Right.
whether it goes well or not. And after seeing what he did at Summer League, and the thing you have to keep in mind is it's really hard for bigs to look good at Summer League.
Right.
So the fact that he even was as good as he was at Summer League, that to me is a pretty strong indicator that the Blazers might have actually found something at the 16th pick.
Yeah, and just kind of following up with Dame's press conference yesterday, Sean, it again, never anything that was like, he addressed kind of the miscommunications that happened towards the end of his time in Portland the first time. I found it to be almost like, not even as cliche to be like Dame grew up, but almost like Dame has a different perspective, because a couple years ago, I don't necessarily know if he was in the Scoot Henderson mentorship mindset, right? That's just my opinion, but like, I'm just kind of curious now how he seems to ready to be kind of that mentor and be that player who wants to give back and help this young core grow. And he talked about how much he had been watching the Blazers since they left. Like, it just kind of feel like, he's kind of always kept a hand in kind of this pool, so to speak.
Well, it's just he's just in a different place in his career because, he kind of has no choice but to embrace the mentor thing because he's not going to play next year because he's going to be rehabbing the torn Achilles. So that's pretty much the way that he can, make himself useful for this next year while he's on the shelf and he's not playing. But yeah, I mean, when you're Dame 2 years ago, and I said this the whole time, I totally understood why he decided to request a trade because Joe had been talking very publicly, and I think this was a misstep by Joe. And, speaking to some of that miscommunication stuff, I think there are things that summer that both of them could have handled differently and that both of them would go back and do differently. But when you're Dame, considering Scoot plays your position, is not on your timeline at all for competing, and was hyped the way that, he was hyped at the time as like a future franchise guy, you couldn't blame Dame for feeling like he's Brett Favre and they just drafted Aaron Rodgers.
Exactly.
Which now, obviously, Scoot hasn't really, lived up to that end of it so far. But you can totally understand why Dame maybe, and this would have nothing to do with Scoot personally, because, I've never heard anything about Dame having any dislike of Scoot on a personal level. It's pretty hard to dislike Scoot. He's a great guy. He's a great kid that everybody pretty much likes. But you could totally see where Dame would have some resentment towards Scoot because what he represented would be him feeling like they're moving away from him as the guy that everything is focused around. Now he comes back 2 years later. He gets traded to Milwaukee. Doesn't work out there as far as them contending. Tears his Achilles. It's a lot. He has obviously some personal stuff going on that he's been pretty open about with, the divorce and whatever.
Sure, of course, yeah.
But, and then now he's coming back. And everybody just kind of knows what the deal is.
Yeah.
Like, he knows that he's in a different point of his career. He knows that there's no guarantee that when he gets back from this torn Achilles, he's going to be the same guy that he was before the injuries. He knows that it's about the young guys and that, what Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp, Denny Avdia, Tumani Kamara, now Young Hansen, Donovan Clingan. Those are the guys that are like the focus of the organization, and Dame is just going to kind of fit in wherever he fits in, and he seems like he's pretty okay with that. Now, we'll see where that lands a year from now once he's able to play again, how good he is, how willing he is to take a back seat if that's what it ends up happening. But for right now, it seems like everybody's just in a really good place with it.
Totally, and I still think, the risk is kind of, lower than the reward in the sense of like, if Travis was saying, say Dame comes back at 80% of the player he was, 85%. That's
still a pretty good player. Yeah.
For $14 million a year?
Yeah.
That's not a bad price point either.
No,
so, there's definitely some things to like. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. We'll continue. Final segment of the show coming up next. We'll continue here with Sean Hiken on the Rip City Drive. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive, final segment here on a Tuesday afternoon. Still have Sean Hiken in studio, our Rip City Radio Rose Garden correspondent. Again, read Sean's work over at therosegardenreport.com. Sean's work is unmatched in the Blazer game. Sean, just kind of continuing on, our thoughts on Dame being back and Jrue Holiday. I think we talked about that a little last time when we connected, but just overall, now that you've kind of seen all the dust settle, so to speak, and you're like, okay, in a couple days we'll be able to breathe and kind of just see the new situation that it is, how excited are you to see this new Blazers team take the court and just see, like, what they got, so to speak?
I don't think I've ever been this excited for a season to start in my career.
That's awesome.
That's just my own. And it's mostly because of the Hansen thing. Just because it's so unlike anything that I've ever covered. I mean, usually, we, and again, this is going back to the travel stuff. I don't know how many people want to hear, sports writers complaining about how, like, monotonous, like, it's like, okay, so training camp starts, and then we go through this, especially when you, like, don't know the team's probably not going to be that good. The Young Hansen thing is just such a different element of, like, both the off-court stuff with, like, the amount of interest from China and, like, learning about, like, the Chinese fan base and, getting to know some of that stuff. That's really exciting to me. It's such an interesting story, how far out on a limb these guys went to draft him when nobody else was really putting it out there that they were that interested in him that high up. And we'll see how that works out. And, again, what we saw out of him at Summer League makes me think he might be good faster than I think anybody thought. So I'm pretty excited. Like, normally I'm, by the time we get to September, I'm just like, oh God, we got to do media day again. And, and then it's just like, okay, we just got to get through training camp and get into, the season, and then things start to get interesting. I wish media day was tomorrow.
Yeah, no, and I can honestly, Sean, because you're talking to a fellow, writer himself, like, to your point, this will be, I think, my 11th Oregon State fall football camp that's going to start this year. They've been on all ends of the spectrum. Good seasons are not going to be very good.
And seasons that are just forgettable.
Right, exactly. And I think the thing with Hansen that's kind of intriguing is, I wonder now, Sean, if let's just consider what you were saying, that you just don't know what you're going to get out of Robert Williams, right? Like, just leave it as a TBD.
I'm operating as though he's not going to be healthy enough to really factor into this.
Sure.
Just not based on any information. I haven't heard that he's hurt, but that's just kind of the default assumption.
Sure. For sake of argument, let's just roll with it. And if that's the case, do you think it's possible that Joe Cronin, Mike Schmitz, and company were like, hey, Hansen's going to be ready to contribute right away. Let's accelerate this DeAndre Ayton thing. Maybe if it had been discussed previously, or do you think the moves were not connected, so to speak, as far as buying out DA to maybe open up playing time for young Hansen?
If they hadn't drafted a center, I don't think they would have bought DA.
Okay,
Because even though Klingon was their guy long term, they still need somebody to, like, eat innings, basically. But once they drafted two centers, and I give DA actually a lot of credit for being so willing to take, embrace Klingon and not feel threatened by the fact that they just drafted someone in the top 10 that plays his position. I actually have a lot of respect for the way DA handled that whole situation. But once they draft centers in the first round in back-to-back years, then if you're DA at that point, you might just go to them and be like, okay, look, it's clear I'm not the long-term guy. I have to get, I'm going into a contract here. I want to get to a situation where, I can, I know I'm going to start. I know I'm going to be able to play, and hopefully I can earn another contract. And then, he's willing to give back enough money to help the Blazers out with their tax situation to make it so they could do something like bring Damian Lillard back without going into the luxury tax. Yeah. And then it ends up kind of working out for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, because as I look at it now, you're like, yeah, Donovan Klingon's going to start, and, depending on what Robert Williams may or may not give you, like, you see a clear path to, like, 20, 25 minutes a game for young Hansen.
Absolutely. Him and Klingon both. And then, you throw WAP in there a little bit.
Situational.
But, like, in some matchups he can play, in some matchups he can't, but.
And I'm curious, too, just as the roster of a whole, and this was something that, Dwight James brought up yesterday, I kind of wanted to get your take on it, too, is, like, are there any depth concerns with the team now that, you have a mid-level exception for a guy this year who will not factor in? Does that hurt your depth at all if you have an injury with, say, an aging Jrue Holiday or someone else in the backcourt picks up an injury? Or do you still feel good enough with some of your two-way players, maybe Rupert being in that mix?
Blake Wesley, who they just signed today. Like, I think they have enough bodies there that I think they'll be okay. Ironically enough, the one position that I now kind of think they're a little bit thin at is center.
Interesting.
Just because the Rob Williams thing is such an unknown with his health, and I'm just not ever assuming he's going to be able to stay on the court for an extended period of time. Donovan last year missed a few weeks with an ankle injury, or with a knee injury. He missed a couple of different, it wasn't like anything serious,
No, but
he
yeah, I remember.
He missed a couple weeks with a knee thing. What if that happens again?
Yeah, I think they had to start Dwop one of those.
They had to start. And I mean, that's where you kind of miss having DeAndre Ayton, who you just know you can start and can play and is a contributor. They don't really, if Donovan or Hansen gets hurt and Rob is wherever Rob is as far as his health stuff, pretty quickly, that's the one place where I think they have a little bit of depth issues, which I wonder if they're going to use their third two-way spot, which is still open, on another big, just to have another, break glass in case of emergency.
Right. That would seem like a pretty smart move. And as you mentioned it, you think about it, probably would make a lot of sense. But nevertheless, we are running out of time, Sean. Man, we could probably talk for 2-3 hours, man, but I know you've been super busy lately. I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for coming in and spending the hour with me.